So, Donald Trump just got blindsided by a massive tranche of Epstein documents that the Justice Department was forced to release. And the timing couldn't be worse for him as he's preparing to take office. And what makes this absolutely devastating? These aren't just more photos or vague associations. We're talking about nearly 30,000 pages of FBI files, flight logs, and internal prosecutorial emails that reveal Trump flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet far more times than anyone previously knew, and that federal prosecutors were actively discussing his connection to Epstein's criminal network. According to multiple sources who've reviewed the newly unsealed materials, one internal FBI email from 2020 states that flight records show Donald Trump traveled on Epstein's private jet many more times than we previously had reported or that we were aware of, with Trump listed as a passenger on at least 8 flights between 1993 and 1996. This isn't just another Epstein story that gets lost in the news cycle. We're talking about Justice Department documents that the DOJ itself tried to heavily redact and delay releasing until Congress forced their hand with a legal deadline. And trust me, when Trump's own Department of Justice is releasing files showing he flew with convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell on multiple occasions, including one flight where the only 3 passengers were Trump, Epstein, and a 20-year-old woman whose name was redacted, you know what's coming is absolutely explosive. It's honestly hard to believe we're watching this unfold right now with Trump preparing to assume the presidency again and now having to answer questions about his extensive ties to one of the most notorious sex offenders in American history. Let me fill you in on what's been happening. The Epstein document release has been a political football for months. After Jeffrey Epstein's suspicious death in federal custody in 2019 and the subsequent conviction of his co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell in 2021, Congress passed the Epstein Transparency Act requiring the Justice Department to release all documents related to the Epstein investigation. The law set a hard deadline of December 20, 2025 for full disclosure. But as that deadline approached, Trump's Justice Department began playing games. According to Politico's December 19 reporting, survivors of Epstein's abuse and transparency advocates warned that the DOJ was planning to release heavily redacted files that would protect powerful people. And they were right. When the first batch dropped on December 20th, it was immediately criticized as a whitewash. Over a dozen Epstein survivors issued a joint statement slamming the DOJ for releasing documents that were riddled with abnormal and extreme redactions with no explanation. Entire pages were blacked out. Photos that had been in the files were suddenly missing from the website. And most notably, Trump's name appeared in very few of the initially released documents despite everyone knowing he had extensive contact with Epstein throughout the 1990s and 2000s. The backlash was immediate and bipartisan. According to CBS News reporting from December 20th, Representative Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky who co-sponsored the transparency law, publicly stated that the release grossly fails to comply with both the spirit and the letter of the law, and warned that a future DOJ could convict the current Attorney General and others for not properly releasing all files the law mandated be made public. But here's where the rubber meets the road. After 3 days of mounting pressure from Congress, survivors, and transparency advocates, the Justice Department was forced to release a second, much larger batch of documents on December 23rd. This time, they couldn't hide behind redactions. Nearly 30,000 pages of materials hit the public record, and Trump's name was all over them. According to multiple reporters from CNN, NPR, and PBS who reviewed the files, these documents paint a far more extensive picture of Trump's relationship with Epstein than Trump has ever publicly admitted. And the DOJ's own statement trying to get ahead of the release only made things worse. And before we go any further, let's be real for a second. When the Justice Department that Trump himself will soon control is forced by law to release documents showing his extensive ties to a convicted sex trafficker, and their first instinct is to heavily redact everything and then issue a statement that reads like it was written by Trump's personal defense attorney, you know we're dealing with information that's politically radioactive. This isn't standard document disclosure. This is a department trying desperately to protect an incoming president from his own past while being legally required to tell the truth. When Trump's DOJ issues a statement saying certain claims against Trump are unfounded and false, and that If they had a shred of credibility, they certainly would have been weaponized against President Trump already, but then refuses to specify which documents they're talking about or provide any evidence those claims are false. That tells you everything. They're in full damage control mode and they know these files are devastating. Here's where it gets interesting. According to multiple reporters from CNN, PBS, and NPR who analyzed the December 23 document release, the materials include several categories of evidence that paint a disturbing picture of Trump's Epstein connections. First and most damning are the flight logs and the FBI's internal discussion of them. An email from a federal prosecutor dated 2020 states clearly, "For your situational awareness, we wanted to let you know that the flight records we received yesterday reflect that Donald Trump traveled on Epstein's private jet many more times than we previously had reported or that we were aware of." The email continues, noting that Trump is listed as a passenger on at least 8 flights between 1993 and 1996. According to PBS News reporting from December 23, these flights weren't international trips to Epstein's private island, but domestic flights between New Jersey, Palm Beach, and Washington, D.C. The prosecutor's email specifically notes that on at least 4 of these 8 flights, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's convicted co-conspirator and sex trafficker, was also a passenger. On one flight in 1993, the only 2 passengers listed in flight logs were Trump and Epstein. On another flight, the 3 passengers were Epstein, Trump, and a redacted individual who was 20 years old at the time. Think about what that means. Federal prosecutors examining these flight records specifically noted Trump's presence with Maxwell multiple times. Maxwell was convicted of sex trafficking minors for Epstein. The time period of Trump's flights, 1993 to 1996, overlaps directly with the period when Maxwell was actively recruiting and trafficking young girls for Epstein. When prosecutors specifically flagged Trump's name appearing alongside Maxwell's on multiple flights, that's not casual social contact. That's being in the inner circle during the height of Epstein's criminal operation. The bombshell came when other documents in the release revealed just how deeply prosecutors were examining Trump's connections. According to reporting from multiple outlets, the files include a 2021 subpoena to Trump's Mar-a-Lago club demanding any and all employment records relating to a redacted name. While the DOJ redacted the specific name, we've known for years that Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most prominent accusers who sued Prince Andrew and reached a settlement, formerly worked at Mar-a-Lago. The subpoena suggests federal prosecutors were investigating whether Epstein recruited victims directly from Trump's property and whether Trump or his staff had any knowledge of this recruitment. Another document that surfaced in the files is even more disturbing. According to PBS News reporting, one FBI file includes testimony about a 14-year-old girl who was taken to Mar-a-Lago in 1994. The witness statement reads, "She said that she was there with Jeffrey Epstein, who introduced her to its owner, Donald Trump. Epstein apparently elbowed Trump playfully, asking him, referring to Jane Doe, 'This is a good one, right?' Trump smiled and nodded in agreement." Now, Trump has not been accused of any criminal wrongdoing in this specific incident, and the document doesn't allege Trump did anything beyond that interaction. But think about what that testimony describes. Epstein bringing an underage girl to Trump's property, introducing her to Trump in a way that strongly implies Epstein is showing off a victim, and Trump responding positively to that introduction. Even if Trump didn't participate in any abuse, the testimony suggests he was aware of Epstein's preferences and interest in young girls, which directly contradicts Trump's long-standing public claim that he had no idea what Epstein was up to. This testimony sent shockwaves through legal and political circles because it provides contemporaneous evidence from the 1990s, long before Trump's presidency, suggesting Trump was aware of Epstein's predatory behavior. According to legal experts who spoke to CNN, this kind of witness testimony is exactly what prosecutors look for when determining whether someone was part of a criminal conspiracy or had knowledge that would make them liable as an accessory. The fact that this testimony exists in FBI files means investigators took it seriously enough to document and preserve it. Legal analysts are noting that while these documents don't prove Trump committed any crimes, they utterly destroy his long-maintained narrative about his relationship with Epstein. Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and Mueller investigation prosecutor, told MSNBC that Trump has spent years claiming he barely knew Epstein, that they had a falling out, and that once Trump learned about Epstein's behavior, he wanted nothing to do with him. But these documents show Trump was flying on Epstein's plane regularly in the 1990s, was present at Mar-a-Lago when Epstein brought underage girls there, and according to at least one witness, responded positively when Epstein essentially showed him a 14-year-old victim. That's not a casual acquaintance. That's someone who was in Epstein's inner circle during the peak years of his sex trafficking operation. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen Trump's Epstein connection come back to haunt him when documents get released or evidence surfaces. This pattern of minimizing his relationship with Epstein until evidence forces him to acknowledge more has been going on for years. Just think about how Trump initially handled questions about Epstein back in 2016. When asked about their relationship, Trump told New York Magazine, "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." That quote is from a 2002 profile, and it's chilling in hindsight because Trump was essentially acknowledging publicly that Epstein liked young women. But once Epstein was arrested in 2019 and the full scope of his crimes became undeniable, Trump completely changed his story. He started claiming the relationship was superficial, that he wasn't a fan of Epstein, and that they had a falling out years earlier. According to multiple reports, Trump told reporters in 2019 that he had a falling out with him a long time ago. "I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan." The problem is that evidence kept emerging that contradicted that narrative. Then there were the photos. Multiple images surfaced showing Trump and Epstein together at parties throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. At Trump's Mar-a-Lago. At New York social events. Always surrounded by young women. Trump tried to dismiss these as just typical wealthy New York socialite interactions. But the photos showed a level of familiarity and frequent contact that went way beyond casual acquaintanceship. You don't appear in dozens of photos with someone over more than a decade if you barely know them. And let's not forget how Trump responded when Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in 2020. Instead of condemning the woman who had just been charged with sex trafficking minors, Trump said at a press conference, "I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well, whatever it is." Legal experts and victims' advocates were stunned. The President of the United States was wishing well to someone accused of trafficking children for sexual abuse. When pressed on this comment, Trump never really explained it. He just moved on to other topics. But that moment revealed something important. Trump's instinct when Maxwell was arrested wasn't to express horror at her alleged crimes or sympathy for victims. It was to wish her well. That tells you something about where his loyalties lie. The pattern is absolutely clear. Trump consistently minimizes his relationship with Epstein and Maxwell until evidence surfaces that makes his denials impossible to maintain. Then he adjusts his story slightly, claiming any interactions were innocent or that he didn't know what they were really up to. But each new document released chips away at that defense. The flight logs show frequent travel together. The witness testimony shows Trump was present when Epstein brought underage girls to Mar-a-Lago. Trump's own words from 2002 show he knew Epstein liked women on the younger side. At what point does the accumulation of evidence make it impossible to claim ignorance? Now, these newly released documents from December 2025 are pushing that question to a breaking point just as Trump is about to retake the presidency. So, what specifically is in these documents that makes this so devastating for Trump? Let's break it down because the details matter enormously. According to CNN's legal analysts who reviewed the full document cache, the files paint a picture of federal prosecutors in 2019 and 2020 actively investigating Trump's connections to Epstein's criminal network. The flight log email isn't just a casual mention. It's prosecutors flagging for each other that they've discovered Trump's involvement with Epstein was far more extensive than anyone knew. The specific language matters. When a prosecutor writes, "many more times than we previously had reported or that we were aware of," that indicates surprise and concern. They're telling each other this is a significant development that changes their understanding of Trump's relationship with Epstein. Now, here's the kicker. The email was written in 2020, during Trump's presidency, while he was actively campaigning for re-election. Federal prosecutors were reviewing flight logs that showed the sitting president had flown repeatedly with a convicted sex offender and his co-conspirator during the years when they were actively trafficking minors. And yet this information never became public until now. According to experts who spoke to PBS, prosecutors may have been constrained by DOJ policy against taking actions that could influence an election. Or they may have determined the flight logs alone didn't provide evidence of criminal wrongdoing by Trump. But the fact that they were actively examining this evidence and flagging it internally shows they took Trump's Epstein connections seriously as part of their investigation. The documents also reveal something else that's gotten less attention but is equally significant. According to reporting from Axios, the files show that FBI agents were investigating at least 10 potential co-conspirators in Epstein's sex trafficking network. The documents reference these co-conspirators multiple times but don't name them publicly due to redactions. Legal experts note that to be considered a co-conspirator in a criminal investigation, prosecutors must have evidence suggesting the person knowingly participated in or facilitated the criminal enterprise. We don't know if Trump was one of the 10 co-conspirators under investigation, but the timing of the flight log revelations and the Mar-a-Lago subpoena suggests prosecutors were at minimum examining whether Trump had knowledge of or facilitated Epstein's crimes. The Mar-a-Lago subpoena is particularly significant because it shows prosecutors believed employment records from Trump's club might contain evidence relevant to Maxwell's sex trafficking prosecution. If prosecutors thought those records were irrelevant, they wouldn't have subpoenaed them. The fact that they specifically sought employment records for a redacted individual, almost certainly Virginia Giuffre, suggests they were investigating whether Epstein used Mar-a-Lago as a recruiting ground and whether Trump or his staff enabled that recruitment either knowingly or through negligence. This leaves Trump in an extraordinarily difficult position as he prepares to retake office. On one side, he now has to answer questions about why he flew on Epstein's plane 8 times when he's previously claimed minimal contact. He has to explain why he was repeatedly flying with Ghislaine Maxwell during the exact years she was trafficking minors for Epstein. He has to address witness testimony that places him at Mar-a-Lago when Epstein brought a 14-year-old girl there and that describes him responding positively to Epstein's introduction of that child. And he has to explain why federal prosecutors thought his club's employment records were relevant to a sex trafficking investigation. On the flip side, Trump's political survival has always depended on his ability to deny, dismiss, and deflect. He'll claim the documents are being misinterpreted, that his flights with Epstein were innocent business travel, that he never witnessed anything inappropriate, and that this is all a political hit job timed to damage him as he takes office. The tricky part is that the documents come from his own Justice Department. The DOJ that Trump will soon control was legally required to release these files. They tried to hide them with heavy redactions and delays, but Congress and transparency advocates forced full disclosure. So Trump can't easily claim this is fabricated evidence from political enemies. These are official FBI files and federal prosecution emails. His own investigators documented his Epstein connections. The best Trump can argue is that the evidence doesn't prove criminal wrongdoing, which is technically true. But not being criminally guilty and being innocent are very different things. The documents don't need to prove Trump committed crimes to be politically devastating. They just need to show he was far closer to Epstein than he's admitted and that he likely knew about Epstein's predatory behavior. This whole scenario is causing absolute panic in Trump's transition team and creating serious concerns among Republicans who have to decide how to handle this as Trump takes office. According to multiple reports from Politico and The Hill, Trump's advisors held urgent strategy sessions after the December 23 document dump to figure out how to contain the damage. Some advisors reportedly argued for complete silence, letting the news cycle move on without engaging. Others pushed for Trump to address the allegations directly, perhaps through an interview or statement where he could explain the flights and maintain his innocence. According to sources who spoke to CNN, the strategy that won out was to have the Justice Department itself try to discredit the documents through official statements. That's why the DOJ issued that bizarre post on social media claiming some documents contain unfounded and false claims against Trump, but refusing to specify which ones. It's damage control disguised as official Justice Department communication. But the strategy backfired because the DOJ's statement raised more questions than it answered. If the claims are false, which ones specifically? If the documents are misleading, what's the accurate version of events? By issuing a blanket dismissal without details, the DOJ made it look like they're hiding something, which only fueled more scrutiny. Meanwhile, Republican lawmakers are in an impossible bind. According to reporting from the Washington Post, GOP senators and representatives are being asked constantly by reporters to comment on the Epstein files and Trump's documented flights with Maxwell. Most are refusing to engage, saying they haven't reviewed the documents or that they're focused on other priorities. That silence speaks volumes. Even Trump's most loyal congressional allies, people who defended him through 2 impeachments and multiple scandals, are struggling to spin this story in his favor. How do you defend someone flying repeatedly with a convicted sex trafficker during the years she was actively trafficking minors? You can say he didn't know what was happening, but then you have to explain the witness testimony suggesting he did know Epstein liked young girls. You can say the flights were innocent, but then you have to explain why he lied about the extent of his contact with Epstein for years. Republican strategists who spoke to Politico admitted privately that the Epstein documents are different from Trump's other scandals because they involve children and sex trafficking. Trump's base has been willing to forgive or dismiss accusations about his treatment of adult women, his business practices, even attempts to overturn elections. But association with child sex trafficking is a bridge too far for many voters, including significant portions of Trump's own coalition. Polling has consistently shown that while Trump supporters will defend him against almost anything, allegations involving the abuse of children create real political vulnerability. Things became even more intense when several prominent Democrats started calling for further investigation. According to CNN reporting from December 24, Senator Richard Blumenthal, who sits on the Judiciary Committee, stated publicly that the newly released documents raise serious questions about what Donald Trump knew and when he knew it regarding Jeffrey Epstein's criminal enterprise. Blumenthal called for the Senate to hold hearings once Trump takes office and to subpoena any witnesses who can provide testimony about Trump's relationship with Epstein. Representative Jamie Raskin, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, went further, suggesting that Trump's documented presence at Mar-a-Lago when Epstein brought underage girls there could potentially make him liable under federal laws regarding knowledge of sex trafficking on your property. Raskin noted that if a property owner knows or should know that trafficking is occurring on their premises and fails to report it, that could constitute a criminal offense. Now, legal experts are split on whether Trump could actually face charges based on the evidence in these documents. Most agree that the flight logs and witness testimony, while politically damaging, don't provide enough evidence of direct criminal conduct to support prosecution. But several former prosecutors told MSNBC that the documents do establish probable cause for further investigation. If Congress or law enforcement wanted to subpoena Trump's communications from the 1990s, question him under oath about his Epstein interactions, or compel testimony from other witnesses who were present at Mar-a-Lago during that period, these documents provide justification for doing so. Legal analysts are noting that these document releases represent a major shift in public understanding of Trump's Epstein connections. For years, Trump has successfully maintained that his relationship with Epstein was casual and that he had no knowledge of criminal behavior. These documents demolish that narrative. Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and MSNBC legal analyst, explained that the flight logs showing 8 documented trips with Trump, 4 of them with Maxwell also aboard, establish that Trump was part of Epstein's trusted inner circle. When you fly on someone's private jet repeatedly, you're not casual acquaintances. You're close friends or business associates. The fact that Ghislaine Maxwell, who we now know was actively trafficking girls for Epstein during this exact time period, was comfortable enough to fly with Trump multiple times suggests Trump was someone Epstein trusted with knowledge of his lifestyle and preferences. Norman Eisen, a constitutional lawyer and former ethics counsel to President Obama, noted that the most damaging evidence isn't even the flight logs. It's the witness testimony about the 14-year-old at Mar-a-Lago. If that testimony is accurate, and it was given under oath years before Trump's presidency, it shows Trump witnessed Epstein introducing him to an underage girl in a sexually suggestive manner and responded positively. Even if Trump didn't personally abuse anyone, Eisen explained, that testimony suggests at minimum that Trump was aware Epstein was a predator and chose to remain friendly with him anyway. That's a devastating character revelation. So, let's break down what this could mean, because it's not just another scandal that disappears in a week. It has serious consequences for Trump's upcoming presidency, his legal exposure, and the broader question of accountability for powerful men who enabled Epstein. First up is the immediate political impact. Trump is about to take office with these documents hanging over his head. Every international meeting, every domestic policy announcement, every interaction with the press will be shadowed by questions about his Epstein connections. Democratic opposition researchers are already preparing ad campaigns for the 2026 midterms highlighting Trump's documented flights with Maxwell and the testimony about Epstein bringing underage girls to Mar-a-Lago. These aren't attacks that Trump can easily dismiss as fake news. They're based on official Justice Department documents that his own administration was legally required to release. Beyond the immediate political fallout, there's the institutional impact. Congress now has justification to investigate further. The House Oversight Committee, if Democrats control it after midterms, could subpoena Trump to testify about his Epstein relationship. They could demand his communications from the 1990s. They could question witnesses who were at Mar-a-Lago during the period when Epstein was bringing girls there. Trump can refuse to cooperate, but that refusal itself becomes a political issue. Why won't he answer questions under oath if he has nothing to hide? Looking ahead to the legal implications, while most experts agree these documents alone don't provide basis for criminal charges against Trump, they could open doors to further investigation. If new witnesses come forward emboldened by the document release, if additional flight logs or communications surface, if anyone who was part of Epstein's operation decides to cooperate with authorities and implicates Trump, these documents establish the foundation for that investigation. According to former federal prosecutor Andrew Weissman, the statute of limitations on most potential crimes from the 1990s has expired, but certain offenses like conspiracy to traffic minors or obstruction of justice related to covering up knowledge of trafficking could still be prosecutable if evidence emerges. The documents also affect Trump's credibility on other legal matters. Trump is currently facing multiple criminal prosecutions and civil lawsuits. In each case, his defense often relies on attacking the credibility of accusers and claiming he's the victim of politically motivated persecution. But when official FBI documents show Trump repeatedly lied about the extent of his Epstein relationship, that undermines his credibility across the board. Prosecutors in other cases can point to Trump's demonstrable dishonesty about Epstein as evidence that he's not trustworthy when he denies other allegations. Now, let's touch on what this means for Trump's political brand and movement. Trump has built his entire political identity on being an outsider who fights against corrupt elites. His supporters love him because they believe he's not part of the establishment, that he's a political insurgent taking on the system. But Jeffrey Epstein was the ultimate insider, a man who cultivated relationships with the world's most powerful people and used those connections to evade accountability for his crimes for decades. Trump being documented as part of Epstein's inner circle during the years Epstein was actively trafficking minors completely contradicts the outsider narrative. It shows Trump was part of the same elite world that looked the other way while Epstein abused children. For Trump's base, many of whom are deeply concerned about child trafficking and have embraced conspiracy theories about powerful pedophiles, the cognitive dissonance is enormous. How do you reconcile supporting someone who was documented flying with Ghislaine Maxwell and present when Epstein brought underage girls to his property? Some will dismiss the evidence entirely, claiming it's fabricated or misinterpreted. But others may struggle with the contradiction between their beliefs about protecting children and their support for Trump. The institutional implications are equally significant. These documents reveal that federal prosecutors during Trump's presidency were actively investigating his Epstein connections, but that information was kept from the public. According to legal experts who spoke to the New York Times, that raises serious questions about whether DOJ policy against influencing elections prevented the public from learning relevant information about a presidential candidate. If prosecutors had evidence suggesting Trump was more deeply connected to Epstein than he publicly admitted, but chose not to disclose that during the 2020 election, did they inappropriately shield Trump from political accountability? Or were they properly following guidelines that investigations should remain confidential? That debate will likely continue for years. The document release also validates what transparency advocates have been arguing all along, that the public has a right to know about powerful people's connections to Epstein regardless of whether those connections rise to the level of criminal charges. The Justice Department initially tried to heavily redact these files and only released the full details when forced by law. That suggests they understood how damaging the truth would be and tried to protect Trump. The fact that transparency advocates and congressional oversight forced full disclosure shows the system can still work when sufficient pressure is applied, but it also reveals how close we came to these documents remaining hidden forever. This isn't just about Trump and Epstein. It's about whether our system can hold powerful people accountable when they enable or have knowledge of heinous crimes but manage to avoid direct criminal liability. Epstein's entire operation depended on powerful men looking the other way, on social circles that valued access and status over protecting children, on a culture where being in the know was more important than reporting abuse. Trump was part of that world. The documents show he flew with Epstein regularly, socialized with him constantly, was present when Epstein brought victims to his property, and by his own admission knew Epstein liked women on the younger side. Even if Trump never personally abused anyone, his participation in Epstein's social circle helped normalize Epstein's behavior and provided cover for his crimes. That's a form of complicity that doesn't lead to criminal charges but absolutely should lead to political accountability. If voters decide that being part of Epstein's inner circle during his sex trafficking operation doesn't matter as long as you weren't personally charged with crimes, we're setting a standard that says powerful men can enable terrible things without consequences as long as they're careful not to leave direct evidence of their own criminal conduct. So, here's the deal. Donald Trump is about to take office while Justice Department documents reveal he flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet at least 8 times in the 1990s, repeatedly with convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell, and was present at Mar-a-Lago when witnesses say Epstein brought a 14-year-old girl there and introduced her to Trump in a sexually suggestive manner. Trump has spent years claiming he barely knew Epstein and had no knowledge of his crimes, but these official FBI files and federal prosecution emails completely contradict that narrative. His own Justice Department tried to hide these documents with heavy redactions until Congress forced full disclosure. This isn't just about one problematic friendship decades ago. It's about Trump's credibility being shattered by documentary evidence showing he was part of Epstein's inner circle during the peak years of his sex trafficking operation. When federal prosecutors were actively discussing Trump's extensive Epstein connections during his presidency but that information only became public now, we have to ask whether our system protected Trump from accountability he should have faced. If Trump faces no political consequences for these revelations, if voters decide that flying repeatedly with a sex trafficker and being present when he brought underage girls to your property doesn't matter, then we're saying powerful men can be complicit in terrible things without any real accountability. The documents are public. The evidence is clear. Trump lied about the extent of his Epstein relationship, and now we know he was far more involved than he ever admitted. Whether that matters to voters, to Congress, or to prosecutors going forward will determine whether we have any remaining standards for the people we put in power. The stakes have never been higher, the evidence never more documented, and the test of whether our system can hold powerful people accountable never more urgent. Keep an eye on this because more documents are coming. The Justice Department said over 1 million more files have been found and are being reviewed for release. Congressional investigations may follow. And Trump's ability to govern will be constantly shadowed by questions about what he knew, when he knew it, and why he lied about it for years.